Generally, they gear towards it's the husband that's the lead pastor. I'm the one that has the role and the official title of senior pastor. It was more important to us to say yes to God than to be worried about our lives looking a little bit different and even taking some work for it.
It's not always easy. It can be complicated, but what if ministry isn't complicated? Right?
That's the truth. Hello, and welcome to another Grow Together episode of the Network of Women Ministers podcast. As you may have noticed, I am not JoAnn. I am Nicky Stade, and I am usually sitting behind the camera. But today I am sitting in Sehi's seat as she is in the middle of moving and transitioning into a new career phase. And we are so excited for her, and she will be back with us again in the next episode. But today I am here and I am so honored to sit here and to have this conversation with you, but I am not doing it alone. I am doing it with the lovely Letty Garcia. Letty, how are you doing today?
Well, doing great, doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. As you said, extremely excited for today's conversation. Sehi, we love you, we miss you, and we pray that you are doing well as you travel. And so, yeah, we're here and we're excited about today's conversation.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great. Letty, you're a pro, so I'm excited to lean in to your expertise today as we host our guests. And, our topic today is one that is very near and dear to my own heart. I really relate well to both of the women that we're going to have on the podcast today. So I'm really excited to go ahead and bring them on. And I just want to briefly introduce them. Our first guest today is JoAnn Johnson. She is a close personal friend of mine. We have worked together on many projects, and she is the executive pastor at New Break Church in San Diego, and she serves alongside with me at our Women of SoCal department in the SoCal Network as director of our Network of Women Ministers here in the SoCal Network, and I am super proud to have her on today. And I am also excited to have on my good friend Christina Moore, who is a female lead pastor. You know what? We don't necessarily have to qualify that. She is just the lead pastor at Lake Morena Community Church in Campo, California. And I am honored that they're going to be our guests. Letty, I can't wait for you to meet them. Are you ready to bring them on?
Excited. Yes.
So hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Christina Moore, the lead pastor at Lake Morena Community Church. We're a small church. We are out in the backcountry. So if you start seeing cow pastures and no grocery stores, that is where we're at. Our population, I think, is roughly around 3,000. It's not a whole lot. So we're kind of far out here, but we love it. It's a beautiful place. And we live here with my three kiddos. I have a fifth grader, a third grader, and a 4-year-old. And my husband, Robert, who works full time and just is here to help and serve and just love him dearly. And we're not city people. We're out in the country. So it's kind of a unique dynamic.
I love that. That's not the typical picture that one envisions when they hear Southern California.
Right.
So yeah, I'm so glad that you're on here. JoAnn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, JoAnn, and I have the joy of living in San Diego, California. I'm not in the city, I'm in suburbia, which has its advantages because we have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old boys, and they are incredible, and it's so fun being a boy mom. Married to my husband, Eric. So it's been great.
Wow, congratulations.
I hear California and I just picture everything is beautiful. Now, don't mistake, Texas is just as great, However, like you, Christina, I live on the not so green side. Well, you probably live on the green side. I live on the not so green side of Texas in a very rural area as well. But it's a beautiful thing to have California represented today. So excited. And also you, Nicky, I know that you're in California, so I'm sure that's just as beautiful. But we're so excited for today's conversation. And really, ladies, I'm so honored to be able to have, met you guys and get to know you guys a little bit more. And upon doing that, I think this is just a perfect conversation and topic that is also dear to my heart. Like you mentioned, Nicky, many of us serve in ministry alongside with our husbands. My husband and I, we lead pastor in our church, but at the same time, I also also lead in a district level that's a little bit more busier. And so understanding the dynamic of leading and leading in a different capacity, where our husbands have come alongside us and really have motivated us and encouraged us to lead in the role that God has called us to. And so we know that you two have a phenomenal ministry. And I want to get started and ask you guys, can you share with us, what is your role in ministry? I know that, as you know, it's common for female ministers to serve alongside their husbands in some capacity. However, I know that your experience is a little different. And so can you tell me about that? Christina, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me again, as I said. And I have been pursuing my credentials for a little while, and my husband doesn't hold credentials. He loves the Lord. He serves humbly, and he's amazing. We do quite a bit together, but I'm the one that does the leading in the pulpit. I run the annual business meetings, the board meetings. I'm the one that has the role and the official title of senior pastor. It is an interesting dynamic because generally, people, they gear towards, it's the husband that's the lead pastor and it's the husband that's leading. But from day one in our relationship, it has always been that way. Even when we got together, I was the one that was going to ministry school, and I was the one that was seeking missions, because there's a period of time that we lived in Mexico when we first got married. And he has always been supportive, because it's always been evident that we could see God moving and we could see God laying the path in front of us. And so we always have just said yes. Our lives have always just looked different, but it was more important to us to say yes to God than to be worried about our lives looking a little bit different and even taking some flack for it. But he's supportive, and it's awesome. And we serve at Lake Marina Community Church, like I said, out in the boonies, but God is doing good things, and we're just grateful and honored to say yes to the Lord and to be able to be a part of what he's doing.
That's amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know, JoAnn, your story in your ministry looks very similar. Can you share a little bit about your role in ministry as well?
Yeah, I get to serve supporting our lead pastor, Pastor Robert Walks at New Break Church, and I oversee all of our pastors, men and women, and it's such an incredible church to be a part of, that there's no issues with me being the leader, because they've had female leadership before, and so I just got to step in and begin leading. So that was really a gift to be able to do that. My husband, even though he's a pastor's kid and missionary kid, from when we first started dating, he just never felt called to ministry. He never felt called to vocational ministry. But he knew that I always was. I was on staff. We met because I was on staff at his dad's church. So I married the pastor's son, which is super, super fun. I'll just say, side note, we dated in secret for a while because I didn't want to risk my job just like dating the pastor's son. So
wow. I love that story.
I wanted to make sure that this was going somewhere before I made everything super awkward by dating the pastor's son. And so it's been really a joy. He has been such an incredible, especially early on in ministry, because I don't come from a ministry family. He was such a voice of wisdom. And the first time a church person spoke badly about me and he told me that was normal, I was like, what? These are church people, all the things that you don't know if you weren't around ministry growing up. And so he's been a cool behind the scenes support, and just very supportive in whatever God's called me to do, and supporting in the background. It's an awesome.
I love that. I relate to that really well. My own husband is not in the ministry either. He actually serves in the medical field, and he loves his job. He loves his career, and he loves supporting me as I minister in the church. And he volunteers. He's on our worship team, and he's helped with kids ministry before, and he's done all kinds of things, but he does not feel called to pursue credentials at all. And I don't know, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience. I know in my experience, there are times where he does not come with me to certain church events or network events that are geared towards ministers, because that's not a part of his job. And when he does show up, sometimes when we are introducing ourselves, people automatically assume that he's the one who's leading in ministry, and he just kind of smiles and nods and redirects them to me. So what's kind of been your experience when people assume that your husband is the one that's leading in the ministry and not yourself?
Yeah. So my husband and I, we have attended a few events together. We're a little bit newer. So as a senior pastor, I only have about a year to 2 years. So we're a little bit fresh. We've been to a few events together, but it's funny because we actually haven't had that happen. I was thinking about this question and I thought, oh my goodness. On the other side of that though, because I'm generally the one that will jump into the conversation first, and then I'll introduce myself. And the only thing I can say is that people have either gotten quiet or maybe they were a little bit surprised. But I haven't necessarily had anybody assume that he was the pastor. What I have had happen is that as soon as I get up to start preaching, they realize that I'm not the girl that's just giving the announcements, that I am the senior pastor. And I've actually already in my year to 2 years of being the senior pastor, I've had a handful of people that just got up in the middle of the service and walked right out.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
Awful. That's awful.
And I'm genuinely so sorry to hear that. I think that as women in ministry, it's been something that maybe many of us have come in contact with, whether it's somebody stepping or walking out, or just having the silence when you do introduce yourself as a lead pastor, or make mention, no, it's not necessarily my husband, it would be me, and kind of having that shift of conversation where it kind of gets a little bit awkward. But I believe that now more than ever, we're in a time where that is genuinely shifting, where we're seeing a shift of women, taking the place in ministry and their calling, and really stepping forward and doing that it's becoming more familiarized. I think it's also opening a door for the generations behind us to see that we're able to step through those moments and those situations and persevere, and with resilience, and say, okay, God, I'm going to stand on what you call me to do. Yeah, that throws me off, but I'm here not because it's genuinely by choice, but by calling, that we respond in obedience. And I commend you for that. That's so impressive.
Well, Christina, you're even more like Jesus, because not everyone wanted to listen to Jesus either. And so thank you for continuing on. I think that is probably a huge fear of many women being lead pastors or preachers, is that just won't be accepted. And the thing is Jesus wasn't accepted. So you have that in common with Christ. And thank you for staying faithful to your call. Even in the middle of that, I have, my respect for you has just like quadrupled. Because, it's just amazing.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly where, in wanting to lead is really being able to showcase that part of ministry that not many of us talk about, but I can believe that many of us can relate to. And this is really where our conversation is directing and saying, we are women that have responded to the call of God. And as many of us know, and being in obedience to the Lord, we don't know what that looks like. When we said yes to the Lord, whether, that was at a youth camp, or whether, I was 8 years old in church and never really seen women in ministry. I grew up in a very conservative church where I just saw women on the worship team and Sunday school teachers. And although that is phenomenal and that is great in that capacity for the Lord to use women, but we have been able to see that when I felt a tug, all I knew was I want to be a pastor's wife. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't even know what I was asking for, to be honest. I wrote it in an essay in 5th grade. And still looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I look at full circle. And when at one moment, when I married my husband, and we were in a Sunday service and my husband was preaching, it was like that aha moment of like, this is what I wrote about. Like, wait a moment, And so to be able to have you guys share with us these experiences and this perspective in ministry, I think I would have wished that I had access to something like this and said, man, there's women that are doing it, and they're doing it well. They're leading well. They're pastoring well. And they're the lead pastors. They're executive pastors. And what exactly, that looks like. And so, yes, this leads me to the next question. What is one thing you've had to overcome, whether that's just a situation in your, maybe overcoming a mindset, an idea in your heart, to lead this type of dynamic in your ministry?
So I'm actually partially envious of spouses of women whose spouses are full-time in ministry with them, for the purpose of I love business meetings, I love conferences, I love talking about what God's doing and ministry. Like I just eat and breathe. I love it. And I love what I get to do as a part of our district, our network. And my husband doesn't have those same passions. He's passionate about the Lord, he's passionate about his family and about me, but he doesn't share those same passions. And what I've had to overcome is recognizing that there's actually some really strong benefits to me being the one who's in ministry. He gets to have his job, he's a financial advisor. And actually his ministry is he helps pastor, he besides helping other people, but he helps pastors and churches with their finances from a professional standpoint. And so that's his ministry that he gets to be passionate about. And so I had to overcome wanting what I thought I wanted, but really I get to pursue what God's called me to do with, sometimes, especially if you're married to a pastor, you kind of take turns of who gets to follow God's call or next step. And maybe you have to go maybe not be in ministry for a while because your husband got offered another position or another church, or you need to serve in a different role in the church than maybe what you're passionate about because they need someone in kids ministry or they need someone in worship ministry. And you're like, well, what I really want to do is this, whereas I get to pursue what God's called me to do and how he's gifted me. And so I had to kind of overcome wanting him to be as excited about general council or network conference as I was, and just say, that's okay for him to not be excited about those things. I'm excited about those things, and he's letting me be excited about those things. So that was one for me.
Wow. So good. So good. And such a unique dynamic, and being able to come in agreement with that, our passions may be different. They may look different, but in the kingdom, they work so cohesively and they come together. I think, as you had mentioned, overseeing pastors and being part of, the church and the church board and other ministries like Christina, you mentioned, being a part of, doing the financial meetings, like those things come hand in hand. And I think like that's such a phenomenal thing to do, is recognize my husband may not be in full-time ministry or may not be in the role that I serve in, but I know what he is and who he is and what he does is necessary for me to lead in the capacity that I lead. And it's so needed. So good, JoAnn. And Christina, how about you? Has there been, something that you have had to overcome to kind of shift the mindset or your heart or thought process in leading this type of ministry?
Yeah, I could think of a couple of things. One of the first things, and I'm just going to be real transparent because I imagine that there's other people that struggle with this too. My love language is words of affirmation. So I love to know that I've done a good job. But at the end of the day, saying yes to becoming a women minister will definitely break people pleasing in your life. That I have said yes to the Lord. And I have to please the Lord, and that's it. But again and again, you face those situations where people just don't agree, or they theologically interpret it different, and they just can't see God's hand in it. Or on the other side of it, I'm like, it's amazing. I've seen God do so many amazing and miraculous things, and the path has been so clearly carved, and there's just no way to deny it. And I think just seeing the call of God and having it be something that was formed over my life from a small child. So even if I wasn't always following God, I really saw his hand prepare me for this moment. And I can look back past years, moments in my life where he prepared me for what I'm doing right now. And so even though I have weak moments, and maybe struggle with that a little bit, I know at the end of the day that God has called me, and he will strengthen me and equip me to do what he's asked me to do. So
that's beautiful. I love that so much. I'm glad that you were transparent with us. Thank you. Because you're right. There are women out there who are sitting here asking themselves, can I do this? And to see such shining examples today is, I think it's going to just do a lot to really help encourage women to keep going, even when things are hard and even when things feel like no one has done this before. And so I don't know why I'm called to this, but clearly women have done this before. And I just want to speak a little bit to the relationship aspect of serving in ministry when your husband does not. I had been married for probably about 10 years by the time I had figured this out, that was the call on my life. And so this was something that my husband and I navigated together. And I don't know necessarily what your story is, but I know that there are some women out there who have had that same experience. And then there are other women out there who are young, they're single, they're serving in ministry, and they're wondering, do I have to marry a pastor to keep doing this? Like, how do I serve in ministry? What if God brings a man into my life and he's in sales, or he's, a professor? Like, what does that look like? So can you just share a little bit about any advice you have for how to navigate your, marriages when you guys are serving in different lanes and different vocations?
Well, so for me, even though I was on staff at a church, I didn't have my credential, and I certainly wasn't involved at a district network level. And so that has been a progression over the years. Now, my husband has been incredibly supportive, but there would definitely be seasons like when our kids were younger and asking to go to a conference or something was a big ask. It wasn't just giving up his time. It was also requiring a lot more of him, physically watching young kids. I remember my last school of ministry class, I was pregnant, and I was like, thank God I got these done before before we had our first child, because I would have had to ask him to watch the baby all day, Friday and Saturday, when I had the school of ministry classes. So he definitely was on this journey with me. And then even when I left for a couple of years, I was serving full time in our network office. And that was a time commitment, because in the network office, it requires a lot more travel. And so our boys were 2 and 4 when I moved into the network office, meaning I had a lot more weekends that I had to be away, 2 weeks for summer camp that I was up at camp and navigating with young children. And so I just say this. My husband has been such an anchor for me. When I would give all of my time I would say yes to everything, he's helped remind me of the importance of family. And I think being a pastor's kid brings that into full focus for him all the time, of guarding our family time together. And he's been the voice of God to me to remind me of the importance of those things. And I'm so thankful for the times when he's pulled me back and reined me in. And that's been a blessing to me, because otherwise I probably would have spent years not connecting with my kids and saying yes to everything and becoming so overwhelmed that I would do what many people I've heard pastors talk about later in their years of ministry, where they neglected their family just to do ministry. And so I've been thankful for that in our relationship, that even though supportive doesn't always mean saying yes, sometimes being supportive is helping you be who God has called you to be, and also guarding your family. So
wow, that's powerful. Like that's so powerful. I'm literally like, my eyes are so watery. I'm trying to hold back because you do, and as you speak so highly of your husband, and as this is what this is all about, is that we say yes to the Lord in the capacity that he has called us to. We get to do that because behind the scenes, we have men of God that God has them in a different field or working in a different area and serving well in that, but also being able to be that voice of God to their home. Because as moms, we know that leading, traveling, our kiddos, I can relate so well with your story, JoAnn. My husband was a PK as well. And so there's times where I'm going, and it seems like doing for God is doing and saying yes and saying yes. And sometimes it's like, Letty, you have to slow down. You want to do school, you want to travel, you serve as DYD, you want to, serve in the church. Like you gotta let's slow down, let's breathe it in, and that voice of reasoning that sometimes we take so much for granted. I can be so guilty to take that for granted. But when you see the fullness of where you're able to lead, JoAnn and Christina, Nicky, where we're able to lead, we realize we can't do it alone, and who God has partnered partnered us with, we get to do that well. And so thanks for sharing that. That was so powerful. Christina, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm super proud of my husband. He is amazing. He is supportive. My husband grew up, I would say, longer in church than I did. I went to church growing up a little bit. It was a little sporadic, but I didn't really get saved till I was about 18. His dad had major liver trauma and actually died in the household where an ambulance came, and his whole family got saved when he was like 10 years old. So by the time I had come in to the church where he was at and we met, he had already been there for like a decade. And so he was already busy serving the Lord. My husband would die at the thought of being in the pulpit. That is not his thing. It is not his role. I relate to what Nicky was saying, that is just not what God created him for. And he functions best in what God created him to do. He is techie. He is savvy. He knows live stream. He knows a ton of stuff, but it is not his call. And he doesn't even have the desire to be a pastor. But in all of that, he sees when God is moving and he sees when God is doing things. And I would say my biggest word of advice would be to know your spouse's heart, to know it and to listen and to take time to communicate, because I never run ahead to a position without stopping and asking my husband, what do you feel like the Lord is saying? And taking time to discuss it and pray about it together. Even as I was getting ready to take this position as lead pastor, my concern was, how do I adequately still love my kids, love my husband, make sure that I can do everything that I need to do to provide a good home for them? And I remember I was just sitting in the car and I was wrestling. And this is where God knows, right? He your spouse's heart, and his heart has always been to support what he sees God doing. And so we're sitting in the car and he's sitting next to me, and he can tell I'm just in my seat and I'm just wrestling, and I'm, wrestling with God and telling him every reason why I can't do it. And my husband just looks over at me straight in the face and he says, Christina, he says, if God is calling you to do this, you have to do it. And I was like, okay. I love that he's supportive. I love that when he sees God doing something, he knows that we need to say yes. And he's good about pushing me in the uncomfortable. Even though it's not necessarily his role by vocation, he sees the importance of it. He sees the call and he's supportive of it. And because I love him, I take the time to stop and listen and hear his heart and things without just running ahead, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And I think just the key factors of what you guys have been able to just communicate. And I think, Christina, when you said, my husband's passion is to support where he knows the Lord is saying yes to. And honestly, there's a lot of times where I want to say yes, where maybe the Lord is not necessarily opening that door, and they become that voice of reason, the greatest support. And I think that we champion those husbands who are able to confidently lead and be alongside a powerful leader who happens to be a woman, and God does not make an exception of people. He doesn't say, well, I don't know, he gives us the grace for what we need. In the capacity that he's called us to lead. And so, ladies, I cannot thank you enough for just expressing so much insight into this dynamic of ministry. I think it's a lot more common. An article went out on Christianity Today about the Assemblies of God really championing women in ministry. And we're seeing a shift. We really are. I'm so excited that we get to walk in this and we get to be a part of it. I read the statistics and I'm like, I'm part of that statistic, and not because it's a prideful heart, but it's a heart of humility, saying, God, like, you would choose to use us, and whatever that role looks like. I know that you guys are paving a way, like I mentioned before, for a generation of young ladies that are leading in a different way. It's looking different. Ministry is looking different, full circle with this next generation coming up, and they're leading in ways that we have probably never considered that being a form of ministry, whether that's through social media, whether that's through TikTok, whether this is about raising up a generation of young women that are able to say, you know what, she can do it. if I felt lead to pastoral ministries, then I know I don't necessarily have to cross my arms and wait for a pastor guy to knock on my door and say, let's lead together. It may look differently, and that is perfectly okay, because you guys are killing it in California. So JoAnn, Christina, thank you so much. So honored to meet you guys. So honored to know that although we are states away, we are doing this together. So thank you again.
So good to be on. Thank you guys for having us. And it's just a joy to be able to serve how God's using us. And it's not always easy. It can be complicated, but what if ministry isn't complicated?
Right.
That's the truth.
Yes.
If I can share one thing that's the advantage of being a female in ministry with a husband for your husband, is they don't have the same stereotypes as maybe a traditional model of the male being the pastor. So they don't have to like run a ministry or, show up or work for the church for free. I don't know, at least not in my church, so that's some of the advantages.
Yes.
You're right. There's not that 2-for-1 expectation.
Nope.
I think it could depend on the church too,
Probably.
what their staff is like and what they expect. But yeah, I think generally you're right. It's a little bit different, which is good and a little bit releasing maybe for them.
Yes. And again, as we wrap it up, I just want to give a big shout out to your husbands who are championing you in ministry. Definitely a big shout out to all the husbands that are really being that voice, really being that push of confidence for their wives, and are really holding the fort at home when we're not there. Like, those are things that are on scene. And so big shout out to all of our husbands that are leading alongside with, or, in ministry and not in ministry. Thank you so much for saying yes to the Lord, even in that capacity. So ladies, again, we love you guys. We're cheering for you. We are in your corner. And thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you.
Wow, Letty, that was such an amazing conversation. And I am just proud to serve alongside these women. They are amazing, exceptional servant leaders. And I really resonated with what Christina said about how her husband just cheers her on and knows how to push her towards what God is calling her to do, even when she feels hesitant. I feel like my husband does the same thing. I'm usually a little reluctant to push into something that God's calling me to do. And he's always like, just do it. Just go for it. This is what God's calling you to do. Just do it. And I so appreciate that voice, because I feel like I would probably not be where I am today if he had not stood there and said, no, this is very clearly what God is calling you to do. So what did you get out of it today?
Oh, it was so good. Honestly, I think, like you mentioned before, in some way we serve in that capacity. Like I said, I feel like I do life with my husband in every aspect, but as a shared pivotal, moments that they were sharing about how it's our husbands who I feel are saying yes to the Lord beyond what the eye can see, because I know that when I talk to my husband and he shares with me, and there's this kind of, sometimes, like we've mentioned before, whether there's stereotypes or ideas of women leading in ministry and their husbands coming alongside and supporting them. For me, specifically in the district level, like, I've been able to witness my husband say, Letty, I'm here to make you and push you to fulfill God's dreams upon your life. And knowing that it still means that we're one. It still means that it's our ministry. Whether I carry the role and he comes as a support, it's still our ministry, because behind the scenes, he's saying yes to God. And me being able to say yes means that he's saying no to other things. Me being able to say yes to the Lord means that my husband, perhaps in those moments that I travel, he's saying no to something else. He's sacrificing something else so that I can walk in the calling that God has also called and placed over my life. And so through this whole conversation, it's really a different perspective in ministry. I know a lot of us are women ministers and we're walking in ministry, but this specific dynamic of ministry is very unique, but yet so empowering for, again, young ladies that are saying yes to the Lord and saying, okay, can I start my ministry without being married? Can I start my ministry without feeling like I'm coming alongside my spouse, but that in one moment God would bring two roads together and can work cohesively together. And there was just so much that was shared. I'm just repeating everything they said, but it was so powerful just hearing from JoAnn and hearing from Christina, and ultimately genuinely just hearing their hearts and their passion for the Lord. And for ministries. Ladies, once again, thank you so much for joining us. We are cheering in your corner. And so, of course, if you have yet to subscribe, follow us at AG Women Ministers. We are on social media. You have access to so much resources, and we want to invite you. Also, coming up August 16th at 7 p.m., join our Grow Together team as we go live and have a conversation with you. So once again, ladies, we love you. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.